Imagine a stretch of water so narrow that you could cross its entire width in minutes. But through this narrow passage flows an enormous share of the world's energy: oil, natural gas, fuel for cars, factories, airplanes, and entire economies. This is the Strait of Hormuz. And right now, the world is watching it. Because what happens here doesn't stay here. It can reach every corner of the global economy. The Strait of Hormuz sits between Iran and Oman. It connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman, and from there, the Arabian Sea and the wider Indian Ocean. Geographically, it looks like just another passage through the Middle East, but strategically, it is something completely different. It is a choke point, a place where an enormous amount of global trade is forced through a narrow gateway. The strait's narrowest point is about 21 miles wide, while the designated shipping lanes are much narrower. So why does this narrow strip of water matter so much? Because enormous quantities of oil and gas move through it. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, oil flows through Hormuz averaged around 21 million barrels per day in 2022. That's roughly equivalent to about 21% of global petroleum liquids consumption at the time. And Hormuz isn't only about oil. Around 1/5 of global liquefied natural gas trade also passes through the strait. Much of that gas comes from Qatar, and much of it heads toward Asian markets. A tanker leaves the Persian Gulf. It passes through Hormuz. It enters the Gulf of Oman, then the Arabian Sea, and eventually, its cargo can reach countries thousands of kilometers away: China, India, Japan, South Korea, the energy moving through Hormuz doesn't belong to just one country. Its consequences can spread across an entire continent. In 2024, the EIA estimated that 83% of LNG transiting Hormuz went from Persian Gulf countries to Asian markets, with China, India, and South Korea among the largest destinations. And now, Hormuz has become the center of a much larger confrontation. In recent months, military conflict and tensions involving Iran and the United States have transformed this maritime passage into one of the world's most closely watched waterways. Commercial shipping has been disrupted. Tankers have faced heightened risks, and governments have been negotiating over how the waterway can safely reopen. As of August 9th, Iran says an interim arrangement with Oman is being discussed. But Tehran has also made clear that an arrangement with Oman alone would not be enough. A broader agreement involving Washington remains part of the equation. You might ask, why not simply go around? It's a fair question, and the answer reveals just how fragile the global oil trade really is. Yes, alternatives exist. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have built pipelines capable of moving crude over land, bypassing the Persian Gulf altogether. But these routes were never designed to replace Hormuz. They were designed to supplement it. When you measure their total capacity against the volume that flows through the strait each day, the gap is enormous. There simply isn't enough alternate infrastructure to absorb a full disruption. And this is the quiet logic of a choke point. No one needs to control an ocean. They only need to hold the narrowest passage within it. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has said as much. Bypass pipelines can ease exposure, but they cannot eliminate it. The spare capacity isn't there. One strait, a fifth of the world's oil supply, and no easy way around it. And when a choke point becomes dangerous, the first thing that changes isn't always the price at the gas station. It starts much earlier than that. Shipping companies begin absorbing higher insurance costs. Tankers are delayed. Some are rerouted entirely. Energy traders start pricing in risk long before a single barrel stops moving. Refineries grow uneasy about their supply lines, and markets begin reacting, not to what has happened, but to what might. If the disruption lasts long enough, those costs don't stay contained. They move through the entire supply chain. The U.S. Energy Information Administration has documented this pattern. Disruptions at major oil choke points create supply delays, raise shipping costs, and push energy prices higher. By the time it reaches the pump, it's already traveled a long way. And here's where the story becomes even bigger. Much of the energy that moves through Hormuz doesn't stay in the region at all. It's bound for Asia, China, India, Japan, South Korea. Economies whose industries, whose transportation, whose daily functioning depend on energy that arrives from somewhere else. So a prolonged disruption at this one strait wouldn't stay a Middle Eastern story for long. It would become an Asian economic story. And an Asian economic story in a connected world quickly becomes a global one. But Hormuz isn't only about economics. It's also about military geography. Iran sits directly along the strait's northern edge. Oman controls the southern shore, and beyond these two nations, major international naval forces operate throughout the wider region, a presence that has persisted for decades. That proximity makes every movement here strategically significant. A commercial tanker, a naval vessel, an aircraft passing overhead. Even a single warning transmitted over open radio. In a space this narrow, any one of them can suddenly become part of a far larger calculation. So what happens next? There are several possibilities. The strait could gradually return to normal shipping patterns, as it has after past periods of tension. A temporary arrangement could ease the immediate danger without resolving the underlying conflict. Or, if negotiations fail and military tensions rise again, shipping risks could remain elevated for months, not days. And that is why governments around the world are watching every announcement, every statement, every naval movement, every diplomatic signal. Because Hormuz doesn't need to stay closed to create problems. It doesn't even need to close at all. Even uncertainty has a price. The Strait of Hormuz teaches us something larger about the modern world. Globalization has connected economies more tightly than at any point in history. But that connection carries a hidden cost. It creates vulnerability. A narrow passage, thousands of kilometers from most of the people it affects, can quietly shape fuel markets, shipping routes, manufacturing schedules, electricity prices, even the cost of running a household. That is the strange power of geography. Sometimes the smallest places on the map carry the largest consequences. Hormuz is only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. And yet, its importance stretches across the entire planet. The question isn't simply whether ships can pass through this waterway. The real question is this: how much of the modern world quietly depends on them being able to? Because sometimes the most powerful place on Earth isn't a capital city. It isn't a parliament or a palace or a president's desk. It's a narrow strip of water.